Imagine you wake up tomorrow in Tudor England, somewhere between 1485 and 1603. You need a job to survive. Your options? Well, you could stand knee-deep in fermented human urine for 12 hours a day. You could become a high-ranking noble whose main duty is monitoring the king's bowel movements and wiping the royal backside. Or, if you're really lucky, you could get the night shift job where you climb into cesspits full of toxic gases that regularly suffocated your co-workers. Actually, forget that last one. Richard the Riker tried it, and let's just say it didn't end well for him. You're about to discover 12 jobs from Tudor England that were so unbelievably awful, so mind-bogglingly disgusting, that they make your worst day at work look like a vacation in the Bahamas. And before you think I'm exaggerating, just wait until you hear about the guy whose actual job title involved the king's bathroom habits. Yes, that was a real position, with a salary, and believe it or not, nobles actually fought over it. Let me take you back to an era when occupational hazards meant literally drowning in human waste, when workplace injuries included having your feet dissolved by urine, and when employee benefits meant you got to keep whatever dead rats you found. These aren't made-up horror stories, these are actual jobs that real people did, day after day, year after year in Tudor England between 1485 and 1603. Number 12. The Handpin Maker. Let's start with what might seem like the least horrifying job on our list, but trust me, by the end, you'll understand why even this simple profession was a living nightmare. In Tudor England, pins weren't the mass-produced items we know today. Every single pin was made by hand, and the process involved 18 separate steps. 18 for one pin! And a typical pin maker was expected to produce thousands of pins per day. You'd take brass wire, straighten it by hand, cut it into lengths, sharpen one end with a file, add a tiny wire head that you'd hammer flat, then polish it in bags of brown and chalk dust that you'd shake for hours. The dust would get everywhere, in your lungs, your eyes, your hair. Pin makers often developed brass founder's ague, probably heavy metal poisoning from inhaling brass dust all day. A skilled pin maker might produce 4,000 pins in a day. That's 4,000 times doing each step, every single day. The work was so detailed that it destroyed your eyesight. Pin makers often went blind by their 40s, their eyes ruined from focusing on tiny metal points in poor light. The repetitive motions caused crippling arthritis, and the pay? Pennies. Literal pennies for thousands of pins. Pin making was often done by entire families, including children as young as 4 or 5. By age 10, they'd be doing the full process, their small fingers considered ideal for the delicate work. By age 30, they'd be half blind and crippled, replaced by the next generation of child workers. The hand pin making industry was finally killed by the Industrial Revolution. But for 3 centuries, these workers had bent over their benches, slowly going blind and crippled, producing the tiny metal fasteners that held Tudor England's clothing together. Number 11. The dog whipper. Now you might think we've covered all the worst jobs, but oh no, we're just getting started. Because Tudor England had a special talent for creating jobs that combined physical discomfort, social humiliation, and bizarre specificity. Case in point, the dog whipper. Yes, you heard that right, dog whipper. This was an actual, official position in Tudor churches, because apparently Tudor England had a massive problem with dogs in church. Picture a typical Sunday morning at your local Tudor church. The priest is trying to deliver his sermon. The congregation is packed in, standing room only, and threading through the crowd are dozens of dogs. Lady Pemberton's lapdog is yapping at Farmer John's sheepdog. The blacksmith's mastiff is lifting his leg on a pillar. 2 terriers are fighting over something dead they found under a bench. Enter the dog whipper. Armed with a long whip and a pair of wooden tongs, his job was to maintain order among the canine congregation. He'd prowl the aisles during service, ready to spring into action. A dog starts barking, whack. 2 dogs fighting, the tongs come out. But here's where it gets interesting. The dog whipper's authority extended beyond just dogs. Unruly children? That's a whipping. Young couples getting too cozy? Whip. Someone falling asleep during the sermon? You guessed it, whip. The position came with unique challenges. Whipping the squire's favourite hunting dog was a good way to lose your job, and possibly your teeth. There are records of dog whippers being attacked by angry pet owners, bitten by the dogs they were trying to remove, and generally having a terrible time trying to maintain order in chaos. The position lasted well into the Victorian era in some parishes, finally dying out as social norms changed, and bringing animals to church became unacceptable. Number 10. The executioner's assistant. When we think of Tudor executions, we picture the dramatic moment, the axe falling, the crowd gasping. But someone had to do all the prep work. Someone had to sharpen the axe, test the block, bind the prisoner's hands, and deal with the aftermath. That someone was the executioner's assistant, also known as the headsman. The assistant would prepare the axe. When that axe needs to cleanly sever a human neck in one blow, it becomes a precise art. Too sharp and it might chip on the block. Not sharp enough and, well, let's just say Anne Boleyn was lucky to get a skilled swordsman from France. During the execution itself, the assistant would bind the prisoner, help position them on the block, and sometimes hold them steady if they were struggling. Imagine that for a moment, your job is to physically hold someone still while your boss chops their head off. But the real horror came after. The heads didn't just get quietly buried, they were displayed on pikes. The assistant would retrieve the head, parboil it with salt and cumin to preserve it, then tar it to make it last longer. Yes, they had an actual recipe for preserving human heads. For traitors, simple beheading was too good. They got hanged, disemboweled while still alive, beheaded, then quartered. Guess who got to do all that? The profession evolved as execution methods became more humane, but the assistant's role remained constant, doing the dirty work that made state-sanctioned death possible. Number 9. The Bearwood. Bear baiting was to Tudor England what football is to modern America, the national pastime, and someone had to wrangle these massive angry animals. Enter the Bearwood. The Bearwood's job started with acquiring bears, usually cubs. They'd raise them, training them by systematically brutalising them until they were mean enough to provide good entertainment. Bears would be beaten, starved and tormented. Their teeth would be filed down and claws trimmed, not out of mercy, but to make the fights last longer. On fight days, the Bearwood would chain the bear to a stake in the ring. Then they'd release the dogs. The Bearwood had to be in the ring during all this, making sure the chain held, replacing dead dogs with fresh ones, and sometimes prodding the bear if it wasn't fighting enthusiastically enough. One wrong move, and the bear could turn on him. There are multiple recorded instances of Bearwoods being mauled to death by their own bears. Bears are intelligent animals with long memories, and they didn't forget the cruelties inflicted on them. More than one Bearwood was found dead in a bear pit, killed by an animal that had finally had enough. The profession died out when bear baiting was finally banned in 1835. Number 8. The Riker. Tudor London's streets were... Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever seen, spread over several square miles, add dead animals, rotting food and human waste. There were no sewers, no garbage collection. People threw everything out their windows, and it all ended up in the streets. The raker's job was to scrape all this filth into carts and haul it to lay stalls outside the city walls. They'd start before dawn with long-handled rakes, shovels and carts that leaked a trail of filth wherever they went. Contemporary accounts describe the streets as being ankle-deep in filth on a good day. On a bad day, after heavy rain, it could be knee-deep. Besides the obvious disease risk, rakers had to watch out for people dumping chamber pots from windows. They also had to deal with dead animals. A dead horse in summer could bloat to twice its normal size and burst when moved, covering the nearest raker in putrid flesh and maggots. Rakers were paid terribly and supplemented their income by selling anything valuable they found in the muck. The profession evolved with more organised municipal services, but the Tudor rakers had it worst, armed with nothing but a rake and an iron stomach. And look, if you're finding these historical revelations as shocking as I am, if you never knew that your ancestors were literally dealing with streets full of human waste and dead animals, then do me a quick favour and hit that subscribe button. Because I've got an entire series of hidden historical truths that your teachers definitely didn't tell you about. We're talking secret societies, forgotten scandals, and historical conspiracies that actually turned out to be true. Trust me, the Raker's story is just the beginning of how weird history really gets. Number 7. The Saltpeter Man. Saltpeter was crucial for gunpowder, but England didn't have natural deposits, so they made it by sending men with royal warrants to dig up your floor. Saltpeter men had legal authority from the Crown to enter any building and dig up the floors to collect nitrate-rich earth. Anywhere organic matter had been decomposing would be rich in nitrates. Stables, dovecotes, churches. They'd show up at your door with their royal warrant and you couldn't refuse them. They weren't gentle. Paid by the amount of earth collected, they'd tear apart stone floors, rip through wooden planks and leave gaping holes. Filling those holes? Your problem, not theirs. People despised saltpeter men with a passion. There are court records of homeowners attacking them with farm tools, of entire villages banding together to drive them out, but they always came back, warrant in hand, ready to destroy your floors in the name of national defence. The profession died out when England started importing saltpeter from India in the 17th century. Number 6. The Plague Searcher. Picture London during a plague outbreak. People dying so fast they can't bury them quickly enough. And the city government's brilliant idea? Hire some old women to go door to door and check if people died of plague. Searchers of the dead were typically elderly women from the poorest classes who needed the money. They had no medical training. Their qualification? I've seen a lot of dead bodies. The city would pay them 4p per body inspected, 4p to enter a plague house, handle the corpse, look for telltale signs, the buboes, the blackened fingers, the bloody froth. They had no protective equipment, no masks, no gloves, nothing. The searchers were universally despised. People blamed them for spreading disease. Families would try to bribe them to declare deaths as anything other than plague to avoid quarantine. Sometimes, when bribes didn't work, they'd resort to violence. The position continued well into the 17th century, finally phased out in 1836 when proper medical certification of death was required. Number 5. The Wed Dyer. Woad was the primary source of blue dye in England, and the process of making it was so foul that Queen Elizabeth I banned it from coming within 5 miles of any royal residence. You'd harvest woad leaves, crush them into a paste, then let it ferment. The fermenting agent? Human urine. The woad paste would be mixed with stale urine and left to ferment in huge vats, producing a smell that contemporary accounts describe as beyond the power of words to express. The fermentation process produced toxic fumes that would burn your lungs, eyes and skin. Woad dyers often went blind from prolonged exposure. They developed chronic respiratory problems. Their skin would turn a sickly blue-green colour from constant contact with the dye. Dyers would stand over these vats for hours, stirring with long poles, their faces directly in the path of rising fumes. Many passed out and fell into the vats. Some drowned. Others were pulled out but never recovered from the chemical burns. Entire communities grew up around woad production, and they were universally shunned. Even other tradesmen who worked with unpleasant materials looked down on woad dyers. Number 4. The Spit Boy. Picture the kitchens of Hampton Court Palace during one of Henry VIII's legendary feasts. Every roast had to be turned constantly, evenly, for hours on end. Enter the Spit Boys, children as young as 7 or 8. They'd crouch next to massive hearths where the temperature could reach well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They'd grasp wooden handles and turn, and turn, and turn, for hours, without stopping. The heat was unbearable. They'd wrap wet rags around their faces and hands, but those would dry out within minutes. If they stopped turning even for a moment, the meat would burn, and the head cook would beat them. If they passed out from heat exhaustion, which happened frequently, they'd be revived with water and put right back to work. They were often naked or nearly naked while working because clothing would catch fire at those temperatures. So these children would crouch there, hour after hour, their bare skin exposed to blistering heat. Some boys would work 18-hour shifts during major feasts. The job became obsolete with the invention of mechanical spit-turning devices in the 17th century. Number 3. The Fuller. To turn raw wool into soft felted fabric, the wool had to be cleaned and compressed. In Tudor England, they had feet, human feet, stomping for hours in giant vats of stale urine. The primary cleaning agent for wool was human urine, stale human urine. It had to ferment until the ammonia content was high enough to break down the lanolin in the wool. Fullers would collect urine from public pots placed on street corners. They'd climb into these vats barefoot and start stomping, hour after hour, day after day. The smell was so overpowering that fullers were banned from living within city limits. The ammonia would literally burn the skin off their feet. Many developed chronic respiratory problems from breathing ammonia fumes all day. The job was typically done by the poorest of the poor, often children as young as 6 or 7. The fuller's trade finally died out with the invention of mechanical fulling mills, but for centuries, Every piece of fine wool clothing worn by Tudor nobility had been processed by someone standing in urine. Number 2. The Groom of the Stool. The Groom of the Stool was a coveted position among the nobility. Actual dukes and earls competed for this job. They schemed and plotted, all for the privilege of wiping the king's bottom. The groom was in charge of the king's close stool, basically a portable toilet. But the job involved so much more. The groom had to monitor the king's diet, keep track of his bowel movements, and yes, perform the ultimate act of personal service. Why would anyone want this job? In an age when access to the king meant power, who had more access than the guy who was with him during his most private moments? The groom became one of the king's most trusted confidants. While His Majesty was otherwise occupied, the groom could discuss state matters, make requests, drop hints about political appointments. The groom had to keep detailed records of the king's bathroom habits, colour, consistency, frequency. These records still exist. Somewhere in the British archives, there are actual documents detailing Henry VIII's bowel movements. The position finally became obsolete after the Stuart period, as indoor plumbing improved and the role of personal physician became more professionalised. Number 1. The Gong Farmer. Picture this. It's 3 in the morning in 1547 London. While everyone else is fast asleep, one unfortunate soul is climbing down into a cesspit with nothing but a shovel and a prayer. This was Tuesday night for a gong farmer. In Tudor England, they had cesspits, big holes in the ground where all the human waste from a building would collect. It would sit there, fermenting, producing toxic gases, breeding diseases, until someone came along to empty it. That someone was a gong farmer. You could only work at night because the smell was so overwhelming that city ordinances banned gong farmers from working during the day. Can you imagine a smell so bad that an entire Tudor city decided it was too much for daylight hours? Gong farmers would climb down into these pits with nothing but a shovel and a bucket. They'd stand knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep, in human excrement, shoveling it out bucket by bucket. The gases were so toxic that many gong farmers passed out on the job. Some, like Richard the Raker, never made it out at all. He quite literally drowned in human waste. The waste had to be carted all the way outside the city walls. You've just spent 6 hours in a cesspit, you're covered head to toe in human waste, and now you have to push a cart full of the stuff through the streets of London. At night, in the dark. The pay? 2 shillings a night. Most gong farmers didn't live long enough to enjoy their earnings. Between the toxic gases, the risk of drowning, and the countless diseases they were exposed to, gong farming had one of the highest mortality rates of any profession in Tudor England. And yet people did it. They did it because they had families to feed, because it was this or starvation. The profession finally died out with the advent of proper sewage systems in the 19th century, but for over 400 years, gong farmers were the unsung heroes keeping cities from drowning in their own waste. And there you have it. 12 jobs from Tudor England that make your worst day at work look like a vacation. The truly remarkable thing. People did these jobs, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. They suffered through unimaginable conditions, faced death and disease daily, and were often reviled by the very society they served. So the next time you're having a bad day at work, just remember, at least you're not a gong farmer. At least you're not standing knee-deep in fermented urine. At least you don't have to boil human heads for display on London Bridge. These jobs are gone now, made obsolete by technology, changing social norms and basic human decency. But their legacy remains, in our labour laws that protect workers from exploitation, in our health and safety regulations that prevent unnecessary suffering, in our understanding that human dignity matters more than economic efficiency. Because seriously, can you imagine having to put that on your LinkedIn profile? Groom of the Stool managed high-level sanitary operations for executive leadership. Yeah, I'll take my desk job, thank you very much. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go appreciate my modern bathroom and the fact that nobody expects me to climb into a cesspit at 3 in the morning. God bless modern civilization, and may these jobs rest in peace, unmourned, unlamented, and most importantly unrepeated.